Very good. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. Hope everyone's doing well. And we are back today with MBDA, hosting a great webinar on bookkeeping. And the topic of today is bookkeeping best practices, vendor information. So we have a really great expert in bookkeeping and all things, Catherine Odo, who will be sharing with us in just a moment about all of that information. It's being recorded, this session, so if you have additional questions, you can always go back to the YouTube recording and stop there and take notes. And then of course, more importantly, if you want one-on-one time with Kate to go over any questions that you have and might have about your business, feel free to message Sophia. We will put the information in the chat so that you can have access to the 2-hour consulting one-on-one session with Kate. So we are with the New Mexico Minority Business Development Agency. We have our website right there at mmda.com. We would love to ask you to join the website so that you can take a look at the events page, and then you can see all the many amazing webinars that we're going to be having in the coming weeks. On Thursday, for example, we're having one from a legal firm that's going to be sharing about the new Corporate Transparency Act. Very important for all businesses to understand what are their requirements and what they need to do so that they don't get fined and don't go to jail if they have a business. Very important. And then we have many other webinars on HR consulting, on business plans, on numerous topics. So go to our website at mmBDA.com, down the events page, and you can register for all of this information for free. Very good. I will transfer it over for Kate to start doing her presentation. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Gabriela. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me again today. So this is the fourth presentation in a series called Bookkeeping Best Practices that we've been doing for the MBDA, and I'm really excited to share that with you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so today, bookkeeping best practices, we are talking about vendor information. I'm going to go through the slides. We'll have some question and answer time as well at the end, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat also. If you have questions, please send those via the chat, and we will try to get everybody's questions addressed. So I'm going to start with some information for those of you who haven't been on one of my trainings before. My name is Catherine, or Kate Odo. I'm the owner of Odo Financial Services. We provide a lot of services to the business owner community here in New Mexico. Bookkeeping is our top priority and one of our main services. We pride ourselves on serving a variety of businesses, business owners from many different backgrounds, and we really like to be in the thick of it with new business owners. So that's my favorite, is teaching and talking to new business owners about how to run their businesses and start off successfully. So that's a little bit about me. All right, so today we're going to be talking about vendors and contractors and information that we want to obtain about our vendors and contractors as business owners. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between a vendor and a contractor. A lot of people use these terms interchangeably. They can absolutely be used interchangeably, but they have slightly different meanings and slightly different purposes within our businesses. So a vendor is typically going to be a seller of goods, an individual or a business entity that sells physical products or even digital products, but not services. A contractor, on the other hand, is going to be a business or an individual entity that sells time, not only time necessarily, but primarily time. So they sell their time to complete a physical or digital product. And they may also incorporate materials into that product. So it can be a combination of services and materials or products, but it could also just be completely services that they're providing to your business. So generally speaking, that's how we're going to differentiate between vendors and contractors. Though in your accounting system or when you're talking to your accountant around tax time, those may be used interchangeably, and that is perfectly acceptable as well. Okay. So the reason that we get all of this information and the reason we differentiate these types of services and vendors versus contractors is really to meet our 1099 obligations with the IRS. So we have to know what type of entity we are contracting with, what type of purchases we are making, and we have to track all of that to meet these specific rules. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to go over why we do this, what it means to us as business owners. Okay. 1099 NEC is relatively new. So the IRS introduced this in 2020. And previously, these types of transactions were recorded on a 1099 miscellaneous. That used to be kind of a catch-all for various types of non-employment activities. However, now we have a special 1099 just for that. So for those of you who have worked your businesses and have been through a tax season with your businesses, I'm sure you're familiar with the January 31st cutoff, right? We have to have W-2s and 1099s in the recipient's hands, or at least mailed by that date. And there can be penalties, right, if we don't do that. So one of the goals is to make sure that we start tracking information before it's necessarily due. Nobody wants to spend January pulling their hair out, chasing businesses or individuals down for information. And so I'm going to set you up with some rules that we have to follow and some good practices for making sure that that doesn't happen every year. So talking about the 1099 rules, 1099 NEC, which again was instituted in 2020 for the 2020 tax year. This is for payments that you make in the course of your business that are at least $600 for services performed by someone who is not an employee of the business. Some other ones, cash payments for fish or other aquatic life, from anyone engaged in the trade of catching fish, and payments made to attorneys, law firms, legal providers. If you work with a paralegal or an attorney, attorney services are subject to a 1099 NEC, not attorneys' fees as part of a settlement. That's separate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for attorney legal services provided, we use an NEC, 1099 NEC for that. Now, there's other kinds of 1099s. Now, I'm not going to go over all of them in this presentation because that's far too much information, but I picked a few that I thought were very relevant to a lot of the businesses that we may be working with specifically in this training. So an NEC is a very common form. Most businesses that I work with end up issuing a couple of 1099 NECs throughout the year. Some examples of those 1099 NECs. If you have service workers, tradespeople coming into your office building to perform repairs, upgrades, if you have a plumber or an HVAC repair person. Those tradespeople are typically subject to 1099 NEC. A 1099 NEC can also apply to the band that you hire to perform at a business function that you're throwing, or it could apply to someone that you take on a contract basis to perform social media work or to do advertising for your business, do some sort of promotional work. So it can really apply to a lot of different types of services that are provided for your business. In the example of tradespeople, services and materials are covered under that 1099 NEC. So because you're primarily purchasing or contracting the service, you also include materials in that 1099. So you don't have to split up the difference between services and materials purchased for those specific vendors. So that's really important to know as well. Okay. Other types of 1099s that we have to be responsible for as business owners, 1099 miscellaneous. So before I was talking about how the 1099 NEC came about in 2020, and that was helpful to split out certain types of services provided. We also still very commonly is the 1099 rents under a 1099 miscellaneous. A lot of people that I talk to, a lot of business owners that I talk to throughout working my business, don't know that you probably need to send your landlord a 1099 at the end of the year. And that's a really common misconception. Now that depends on a few other things, and we're going to go over all of that in this presentation. But that's a really common one that people miss. Royalties. There's also a ton of others. Medical health care services provided. Payments in lieu of dividends or interest. Gross proceeds paid to an attorney. And those proceeds are not for services rendered necessarily, but if they're entitled to a portion of a settlement agreement, that would be a 1099 miscellaneous. So if you have an attorney for your business, you may be sending them a 1099 NEC and a 1099 miscellaneous, depending on the type of work that that attorney did for your business throughout the year. Anyone that you have federal backup withholding also needs a 1099, and that's regardless of the amount. So if we go back to the prior slide, there's a $600 threshold there for the 1099 NEC. If there's backup withholding, if you're required to do backup withholding on someone that you pay for a contract basis, even if they don't reach the $600 threshold, you still have to send them that 1099 if they're subject to backup withholding. And so there's a way we get this information, and we're going to go over that as well. Crop insurance proceeds. We work with a lot of farmers, and if you are in an industry where you have crop insurance and maybe you had a really bad weather year, which we had this past growing season, and you had a crop insurance payout, then that can also be subject to a 1099. So you would, if you had received the proceeds of crop insurance, you would get a 1099 from the payer of that insurance payout. So there's lots of provisions to this rule, and we included this in our best practices series because I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of misinformation. And honestly, I talk to a lot of people who ask their accountant or their bookkeeper and maybe don't get a straight answer. And so that's why we wanted to make sure and include this important information in our presentation. So those are the two types of 1099s that we're focusing on in our presentation today. And now we're going to talk about how you get the information you need and where you keep it and why and all of that important. important information. So, payment method matters with 1099s. Another key to think about when you're paying your contractors in your business or your vendors is how you pay them. So we've had some changes around this in the last couple of years, and I get very excited about some of these changes. I know not everybody, follows the IRS tax tips and their specific rollouts every year, but we do, and so that's why we're up to date on all of this information. So a lot of you are probably familiar with a 1099-K. A 1099-K is what you get from your credit card processor. If you receive payments via credit card or debit card, you have a processor like Square or Clover, you use Shopify, any of those services, you get a 1099-K at the end of the year. And the thresholds for those have changed over the last couple of years. So even if you weren't used to getting a 1099-K before, you may be getting one now because those thresholds have decreased and dropped over the last 2 years. Same thing if you pay your vendors or contractors with a credit card. So if you pay your vendor or contractor with a credit card or a debit card or even a gift card through a gift card processing system, then you don't have to send out a 1099. So that's nice, right? We still want to make sure we have the information because you may change the payment method. You may make some business decisions about whether to use a credit card or not use a credit card. So you want to make sure you have the information. But if you are paying your vendors or contractors with a credit card, generally speaking, you do not have to send them a 1099, NEC, or miscellaneous. There's been a lot of focus in the media and in news releases about other types of payment methods lately. So we're talking about Zelle, Venmo, Cash App. There's a ton of different options, right, for third-party payment processors now that aren't necessarily related to credit card or ACH. So I used a few examples. This is not a complete list, by the way. There are specifics for each one of these, and they are always changing. So you want to make sure from one tax year to the other that you're keeping track of what changes are being made with your designated payment processors. But this is just an example of what we're looking at for 2024. So Zelle, if you use Zelle to pay contractors or vendors, Zelle does not issue 1099-K forms. So any payments that you make through Zelle, if they fit the 1099 requirements that we talked about earlier, you have to send that 1099. That is for any contractors that are 1099 eligible. Becky, I see your question. If you pay your bug guy with a credit card, no, you do not have to send them a 1099. So credit card payments are an all-around exclusion, right? Any payments that you make via credit or debit card, you don't have to send a 1099 on. So that's a great question, Becky. Thank you for that. PayPal and Venmo are a different sort of payment processor than Zelle. So they act similarly, and a lot of us use them every day in our businesses. They are changing their thresholds. So for 2024, I believe Venmo is going to a $5,000 threshold for 1099-Ks. And then last year in 2023, it was 20,000. So there's some big changes that are coming up the pipeline for 2024. And so we want to stay very up to date on those. PayPal is the same way. They're announcing changes to how they process 1099s in 2024. So if you typically make large or frequent vendor or contractor payments, using Venmo or using PayPal or Cash App or any of those other, I'm sure there's other ones that I don't even know the name of, other types of payment processors, you want to make sure when it's getting close to tax time before January, you want to make sure that you're talking to your accountant, your tax preparer about what your responsibility is for those vendors and contractors. Rule of thumb for now, unless anything else changes, right? Cash, which you don't want to do cash if you can at all help it. But cash, check, ACH, and Zelle payments are all currently subject to 1099 NEC and miscellaneous rules. So if you have any service providers that are providing services for your business that would otherwise qualify for a 1099 and you pay them with cash, check, ACH, or Zelle, your business is responsible for those 1099s come January. So other things that matter, now that we're talking about how payment method matters, business structure also matters in your decision on whether or not to send a 1099. So 1099 eligible businesses, generally speaking, are sole proprietors, LLCs, and partnerships. Those are the entities that you would send a 1099 to. A sole proprietor is a freelancer, is an unincorporated business that operates under the identity of its owner. So generally a way to identify that is someone, a service provider who provides you their social security number instead of an EIN. That's not always the case, but that's how you generally will tell that. We'll talk in a minute about how we're going to gather that data. Corporations are generally exempt from 1099s, except a few exemptions of that rule. So don't typically send a 1099 to corporations unless they provide medical or healthcare services or they're an attorney. So if an attorney is a corporation, the attorney business still receives the 1099. So we will talk about how you gather up the necessary business structure information, but that matters when you're deciding whether or not you're responsible for sending a 1099 at the end of the year. And again, that's why we gather this information, is to meet those requirements. So what is our responsibility as business owners? Our responsibility is to gather all of the necessary information before making a payment. I say this all the time talking to clients, new clients, old clients, people I talk to that may or may not become clients in the future. It is really hard to get information after you have paid someone. We're all familiar, or we should mostly be familiar with employee hiring practices, right? You have to get information from an employee before you pay them, before they start working, right? There's necessary information that you gather before they can work for your business or before you can work for another business. That's very standard. We mostly understand that. But in terms of 1099s, I find that I talk to a lot of business owners that are trying to get the information after the fact. It is much easier to say, hey, I would like this information so I can issue you a check because I want to get you paid, right? Before payment versus after payment. Once you've paid somebody or a business, it is much harder to gather up the information that you need. So I always stress gathering up the information before you make any payments, and preferably before they start work, so that you know what your responsibility is and you know what's expected of you. They know what's expected of them. It's just a really good process to put in place. You also want to prepare all of your 1099s and distribute them before January 31st or by January 31st for the prior year. I say before January 31st because as a tax preparer and a bookkeeper, deadlines are very real to me. They're very real in my day-to-day life. And I hate waiting on a deadline. I hate waiting until the last minute because that is very stressful. It is unnecessarily stressful, in my opinion. So putting these processes into place before the end of the year will help you avoid some of that last minute stress, last minute panic, trying to chase down 18 vendors for 1099 information. Putting good processes into place for your business during the tax year will help you avoid a lot of that. And then the other thing is you want to make sure your accountant or tax preparer has the records. So in our tax filings, whether you're a sole proprietor or you have an LLC or you're a partnership, all of those tax forms require that your tax person check a box that says if you were required to file 1099s, that you did it, right? And it's a good idea to have the person who's going to be doing your taxes for tax season go over that information ahead of the deadline, because there's always a chance that you could have missed something. If you have all of the information and depending on your accounting system, I know a lot of folks I've talked to from this group use QuickBooks, which is a very common accounting system. If you use QuickBooks, there's several other accounting systems that will do this for you, but you can have your accounting system track your 1099 eligible vendors for you. There's a box in your vendor screen that says track for 1099 payments. Super easy. You check that box, you have all the information you need, and then your accounting system will notify you when it's time to send those 1099s. Either way, whether you're doing it on paper or whether you're doing it through your accounting system, it's a good idea just to have your bookkeeper, your accountant, tax preparer take a second look and make sure that all of your required 1099s have gone out and that you have the necessary information for any other vendors or contractors that will need 1099s for the year. So that's a really good best practice. Before everybody gets busy into tax season, it's really easy to just have a phone call, share that information with your tax person and make sure that it's accurate and that it's complete. So how do we gather information on 1099 eligible entities or individuals? We use a form called W-9. And this is an old one, but I like it because it shows you the fields that we need. There is a new one. There's a W-9 form that was released March 2024, this month. So there's a new version on the IRS website. And it's a good idea to have a new one every year. Okay, you're looking for changes in name, structure, tax ID. All of this is necessary for your 1099 requirements. So it's a good idea to get a new W-9 every year. So if we're looking at the W-9 on the screen, we need the business's legal name. Okay, box 1 is going to be the legal name on the income tax return. Okay, line 2 can be a DBA if the business operates under a different name. So for example, if a sole proprietor is operating as, we'll go with Becky's question, the bug guy, right? So it would be the individual person's name on line 1 and the name that they're working under on line 2. So we can identify the sole proprietor in that way. Box number 3, they have to check their tax classification, their federal tax classification, which for our purposes is their business structure. So what we're looking for here for most of our 1099 requirements is the first box, which is individual sole proprietor or single member LLC. We're looking for partnerships, limited liability companies, and C corporations and S corporations for those exemptions. So we talked about medical payments, healthcare payments, and attorney's fees. Some of those classification businesses can still get 1099s depending on the type of services that they're providing. So business structure is super important, and this is where we find out. There's also, they want to list their legal address or mailing address where they received the 1099. That's important that you have updated contact information. And there's also a box that I didn't include in the screenshot for backup withholding. If they're subject to backup withholding, which means you have to hold taxes from any payments per the IRS, they have to check that box as well. So that's all very important information that we need to be gathering every year. I work with a lot of businesses that will have W-9s from 5, 10 years ago with contractors or vendors that they've been working with for a number of years. There's always a possibility that there's been a change. There could have been a change in ownership of the business. There could have been a change in name, address, tax ID number. Anyone who's ever sent out a big batch W-2s and gotten maybe a third of them back via returned mail can understand why this is super important to make sure that you get updated information every year. Because businesses move, owners change. There's all kinds of reasons why this information would change during the year. And so it's just really important to make sure that we get updated information as we go. And you can store these if you use an accounting system like QuickBooks. Your vendor information screen is going to have a place to store documents. And I always recommend just uploading this form so that you can go back to it later. We are humans. We make mistakes. Let's say you don't put the correct tax ID number into your tax program when sending 1099s. You always want to be able to go back, find the correct information. So storing this in your accounting system is a really great way to do that. Becky has a question. We'll pause for just a second. A contractor said you need your name and social also listed. So if you are the purchaser of the services, then no, you don't list your information on the W-9 at all. If you're filling out a W-9 for someone to pay you for goods or services, if you're an LLC, then you put your EIN number, which is your federal tax ID number. If you are a sole proprietor, and now some sole proprietors also use an EIN, and that's becoming increasingly more common because as an individual operating under a social security number with their business, there's a lot of places where your social security number ends up on documentation. So I've worked with quite a few sole proprietors who also use an EIN instead of a social security number. So whatever their structure is and whatever their tax ID number is what they're going to indicate on the form. So Becky, to answer your question, an LLC would use an EIN because if you are an LLC, you have to have an EIN and it would not need to contain your social security number. So hopefully that helps. Also, not missing from the screenshot, obviously, is the tax ID number space. Couldn't fit everything I wanted to in here, but you do have to put in the tax ID number for the business as well as all the other information that we went over. And Becky, I would talk to, since you said they want both, that is sounds very irregular as far as that process. So I would definitely talk to your accountant or tax professional about how to approach that, because you should not be putting your social security number on a W-9 for an LLC. Okay, so all right, so that is vendor information in 1099s. Again, I know it's a lot of information, and we went over, I'm going to go back to our 1099. Oh, lost my mouse for a second. I'm going to go back to my 1099 screen here at the beginning. This is a lot of information, and there's a lot of situations that this encompasses, and this can be very confusing. So I know this Zoom is recorded, and I strongly recommend that those of you who are viewing the recording, pause it, take some notes here. This is a lot of information, and this is not all of the information. So there are other situations that are maybe not as common that I did not have space to fit into the presentation. So if you have an uncommon situation and you have a question, reach out to whoever provides tax or accounting services to your business, to make sure that you are meeting all of the requirements for your specific business type and the type of contract work that you pay for with your business. And if you don't have somebody, if you would like to meet with me, like Sophia said in the beginning, absolutely available to answer those types of questions for you. Do we have any additional questions now?
I'm trying to see, but I don't see any questions. So folks, feel free to write any questions in, or yeah, actually that's the only way you can't speak because it's a webinar. Well, meanwhile, I'm gonna pull up the very short poll that we have while people are thinking about questions. So if people will be so kind to just give us some feedback on the work that Kate is doing, and really what this is for, just so that everyone's aware, is so that we can, the funding that we're receiving for, paying for Kate's services so that she can offer free services for all of you, the funders want to know if the funds were spent appropriately. And of course, we want to make sure that people are happy with free accounting services, which I assume there is, but if it's not, if people would prefer something else, let us know, and then we can adjust that as well. So we appreciate everyone's time. Very good. I think I'll give everyone 30 more seconds. And then I see that there's a question, I believe, in the Q&A. Okay, so it says, as an LLC, if you offer a service to another business, what can we do if they did not give us a 1099 NEC?
Okay, so there is a process that we go through if you are supposed to receive a 1099 and you didn't. There's a form that we can fill out and submit with your taxes to report that income. So best practice, if you are supposed to be a recipient of a 1099 NEC or miscellaneous, track that throughout your year. Track what payments you received from that client or customer. And when it comes to tax time, make sure that you let your tax preparer know, because yes, that is something that we want to report. And there is a process that we go through to make sure that that's reported to the IRS when we file your taxes. So that's a great question, Alexandra. Thank you for that. The same thing with 1099s that maybe they say were sent. If you have, I don't know if anybody's ever dealt with a W-2 not received, right? They say it's in the mail or you've had trouble. Same thing with 1099s that maybe the payer says they have sent you and you have not received for whatever reason. Now that we're in more of a digital age, it's a lot easier to retrieve that information typically. But if you're supposed to be a recipient of a 1099 and have not received it, make sure you bring that up during your tax session. Great question.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes. This is your time. You don't even need to do a follow-up one-on-one with Kate. We have time now if you'd like to ask any questions. If not,
No, okay.
if not, I will add to the chat again, information about if you want to follow up and have one-on-one time with Kate, and you can even, go through your books so that she can take a look. Obviously, you only have 2 hours, but if that's something you wish, we'd be happy to connect with Kate and make sure that that happens. So I'll just put information for Sophia here so that Sophia can connect you with Kate. So feel free to send her an email and we can go from there.
Something I'd like to share, since we call this series Bookkeeping Best Practices, we can absolutely, if you are interested in taking advantage of one of the free 2-hour sessions, we can just go through your system and your processes and provide feedback on what is working really well and what you might want to change, what could be, possibly an issue for you later on in your business. So if you don't have specifics that you're wanting to know about bookkeeping or specific questions, we can absolutely work with you on just a little tune-up of existing processes and procedures as well. So something to keep in mind if that's something that you're interested in doing.
Thanks, Kate. That's a really great offer, because I'm sure everyone would like another set of eyes through their system. So just make sure that it makes sense, that it's prepared for growth as well, so that there's no hiccups in the future, that even to keep things more automated, so it's less work for the business owner, since you probably don't want to spend all your time, working on bookkeeping and accounts and all of that. So it's a great offer
Absolutely.
from Kate, just to have another set of eyes on your system. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
Very good. Well, if that's it, we thank everyone for your time. We will end the call. It's going to be recorded, so you can always go back to it. And we'll see all of you hopefully on Thursday for the next webinar on the Corporate Transparency Act. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Bye.